Thank you very much. And I want to thank Historic Milwaukee for inviting me to take part in this webinar tonight. I am very excited about the publication of my book, Voices of Milwaukee Bronzeville. And I'll just start by reading just a little bit from the beginning. Imagine a Milwaukee with horse-drawn wagons traveling down the city street, and a man atop yelling, "Oranges, oranges, oranges for sale." And when you were a little short of money, you could buy on credit from the corner grocery store to feed your family supper. When milk was left fresh daily in your home's milk box, and taverns stayed open all night long. When LAPHAM Park was the community meeting place, and at some point in the day, everyone stopped there to go swimming, to play baseball, or take a sewing class. And electric streetcars extended throughout the city. Some people today don't have to imagine, they have only to remember. This book introduces a few of the men and women who grew up in Milwaukee's oldest African-American community, now remembered as Milwaukee Bronzeville. And they are the folks who personify the voices of Milwaukee Bronzeville. And I'll introduce them a little bit more a little later on. I want to tell you how I got started with the project. My neighbor just down the way, his name is Bill Nolan. We've become very good friends. Every Friday, he and 3 of his other friends get together at his kitchen table, and they just reminisce. And all of them were born in Milwaukee between 1920s and the 1940s. And they met when they were 8 or 10 years old, and they have remained friends into their 80s. And their stories were so interesting, I just barged my way in there with a tape recorder and started recording. And that's how the book got started. Just to the east of him is another neighbor. Her name is MAMIE THURMAN. She's the oldest person in the book. She just turned 94. She was born in the 1920s. And she has all kinds of stories and things like that. So I included her in the project. Along the way, I included a couple of more people, George Sanders, Reuben Harpo, who is Mr. Milwaukee. He has the foremost knowledge of Black Milwaukee in the city. And then the youngest person in the book is SHARON Adams. She was the founder of Walnut Way. She worked at UWM for some time, and now she and her husband run Adams Garden. And so they all agreed, and so I started the interview process. When I started the project, I wanted to call it The Making of Milwaukee Bronzeville. But when I sat down with them and I asked them, did you call it Bronzeville when you were growing up? No, we never called it Bronzeville. It was just the place where we lived. So I changed the name and started calling it The Myth of Milwaukee Bronzeville. And then I understood after a while that that would be very offensive to many people who cherish the concept of Milwaukee Bronzeville. And Alderperson Malele Coggs is trying to recreate that spirit that that community embodied. So one day, sitting at Bill's kitchen table, Joe DECOU, who's another person in the book, started talking, and he said, Sandra, if I had to, I would ask God to give me the same life I had. He said, I had good times and bad times. I had friends, I had love. And then it occurred to me that Bronzeville was not necessarily a place. It was a spirit. It was a spirit of community. And the people who lived that experience have a lot of things they can tell us that teach us today. So that's when the name of the book became The Voices of Milwaukee Bronzeville. So that's how it started.
I like that, because it's much emphasis on the voices as it does the neighborhood.
Right, yes, right. And the spirit, you know. So that's how it got started. I got a new computer and all these things are popping up wanting to sell me things. So just turn them off. So I wanted to interview as many people as I could, but then COVID happened. And so I was only able to get 8 interviews. But, you know, maybe there's a time and room for a volume 2. But that'd be great. Right. So let me talk a little bit more about the book. I started by, and let me bring up my PowerPoint.
Perfect.
Yes. So I started by talking about the tradition that the folks I interviewed came from. And so I began with a little bit of the history of the first Black residents of Wisconsin. And so I included the stories of Jean and Marie Bonga and their children, 2 of whom became very famous. They were fur traders and translators in upper Wisconsin and Minnesota and Michigan, George and Stephen Bonga. I also ran across the history of Marie LaBouche, who was the first woman doctor in Wisconsin. So I included them in the book also, because their histories really made possible what came later in Milwaukee. And I also wanted to talk about the first folks who settled in Milwaukee and started with those who didn't settle here, but came through here. Milwaukee, I don't know if people know, was a very strong abolitionist stronghold. And there are 2 very famous cases, the Caroline Quarles case, who was an escaped enslaved person from Missouri. She came through Milwaukee, was discovered, and had to be rescued and whisked away to Canada. Joshua Glover was also an escaped enslaved person who was actually captured in the area and put in a Milwaukee jail. Abolitionists stormed the jail, rescued him, and he also was taken and fled to Canada. So Milwaukee was a pathway to freedom for many enslaved folks who had escaped enslavement and headed north and eventually to Canada. And that history is also in the book. Some of the early, then I move on to the some early Black Milwaukeeans. Joe Oliver, who was the first Black person to vote in Milwaukee. He came to the area in 1838, along with Solomon Juneau, who was the first mayor of Milwaukee. William and Ann Anderson in 1841 really started the first continuous Black family to live in Milwaukee. They arrived, actually William arrived in 1841 and Ann joined him in 1845. Ann is the daughter of Sully and Susanna Watson, who came after she married William and came to Milwaukee. They followed her. Susanna and Sully Watson are featured, of course, in the streets of Old Milwaukee in the Milwaukee Museum. They were able to accumulate a considerable amount of property and wealth in the downtown area in Milwaukee. Another early Milwaukeean, Robert Tidball, and his wife, Miss Sarah Ann Brown, were among the first Black Milwaukeeans Black people to get married in the city of Milwaukee. And Tidball has also another interesting component to his story. He was a barber. He owned a barber shop in downtown Milwaukee, also other properties in the area. But he spotted Caroline Quarles when she first arrived in the city of Milwaukee. And he suspected that she was an escaped enslaved person. Initially, he offered her help and she stayed with him at his home. But when he learned that there was a $300 reward for her capture, he turned her or told the authorities about her. They went to his house looking for her. Fortunately, abolitionists heard of the situation. They went and rescued Caroline, took her away from Tidball's home, and hid her safely until she was able to leave the city and go on her way to Canada. So Tidball had a very interesting history as being a first Milwaukeean, but also connected to the Caroline Quarles story. There were other interesting early Milwaukee residents who are in the book. Please buy it and read it and learn about them. But I thought it was important to include that history as we got to the other people who are featured in the book. I also spent some time talking about how Bronzeville as a community came to be. The Black population in Milwaukee at the turn of the century, the 20th century, was very small. And I have some figures that I'll show you in a moment to show you how that population grew. But it was very small. And when it was small, before 1915, Black people were allowed to live wherever they wanted to. They were unrestricted in, where they could live, where they could purchase homes and build families. But as the numbers began to grow, started to grow, the restrictions, the racial restrictions began to take form. Starting in about 1910, a growing number of Italian immigrants settled in Milwaukee, and they settled on the east side of the river. And they competed with African Americans for not only the jobs, but also low-cost housing. And that immigration spurt pushed the Blacks to the west and across the Milwaukee River. Another factor that contributed to creating Black boundaries was the development of the central business district around downtown. That development, the small commercial industrial area, as well as the civic center development, pushed Blacks away from downtown to the north. So on one side, the south, Blacks were pushed, past State Street to the north, and on the east, they were pushed away from the east to the west by growing numbers of Italian immigrants. The place that they were allowed to live was in what we now call Bronzeville, was a large Jewish community. So Blacks and Jewish people really lived together and coexisted in that community. Another thing that kind of closed the gap, closed the pathway to further development was restrictive covenants that blocked access to housing on the north and effectively locked Black people into a segregated space, a very small segregated space in the city. And that space became known as Bronzeville. And so by the 1920s, the Black boundaries began to solidify around State Street on the south, Walnut Street on the north, 3rd Street on the east, and 12th Street on the west. That was the area that was considered Bronzeville proper. Bronzeville was never really an all Black community, although we come to remember it that way. For its entire existence, it was never all Black. But what it was the only area in the city where Black people were permitted to live. Of course, the rapid growth of the African American population began to push the boundaries and expanded into other neighborhoods. But even that expansion in the city remained segregated. And these two maps here shows you Bronzeville in the 1930s, which is bordered by Walnut Street, 3rd Street, Highland Avenue, and 12th Street. And then by the 1960s, the border had pushed to Keefe Avenue, to the Central Business District on the south, to Holton on the east, and to 20th Street on the west. So that's how the Black community in Milwaukee was created. And I called it Creating Black Boundaries. And so that was the area in which the folks that I interviewed grew up. I include in the book their profiles to give you a little bit of their history. And I have named them here. You can see on the PowerPoint. The first name I want to talk about is George Sanders. Unfortunately, George Sanders is no longer with us. He passed away just a few months ago. And I'll tell you his story a little bit later, but it really brought home to me the fact that these folks here are the last people who can tell the story of Bronzeville. They lived it, they know it, they remember it. The memories are so vivid about what life used to be, and they embody it in their values and their spirits. And that's the sense I got when I talked to each one of them. And so I always bow my head in remembrance of George Sanders whenever I talk about the book. The others that are profiled: Mamie Thurman, Robert Mosley, Bill Nolan, Reuben Harpo, Joe DECOU, Raymond Washington, and Sharon Adams. So let me start with them. George Sanders was born in Milwaukee in 1931. I asked George which hospital he was born in, and his reply was, "Hospital? What hospital? I was born in a house, a cold water flat on 3rd and Walnut Street." And that response typified George's personality. George's parents arrived separately in Milwaukee in the late 1920s. Mattie George, his mother, originated in Gallatin, Tennessee, and his father, Henderson Sanders, also came from Tennessee. They met and married here in Milwaukee. Henderson worked a variety of jobs, including Alice Chalmers and the Milwaukee North Shore Railroad. George had a very storied career, and he worked, one of the things he did is he worked in the Department of Local Affairs in the government of Warren P. Knowles, and he worked in that administration for 9 years. The next person is Mrs. Mamie Thurman. She was born in Wauwatosa at the what used to be the county hospital in 1927. And she's lived her entire life in the city. Ms. Thurman's family was the 3rd generation of continuous Black families in the city. Her father, Emmett, came to Milwaukee from Topeka, Kansas in 1906. Her mother, Mamie Anderson, arrived in the city from Chicago in 1910. They met and were married in Milwaukee. When Miss Thurman was born, her family lived in a duplex on State Street, just across from what is now the safety building. Later, they moved to North 5th Street, and they lived there for 17 years. Miss Thurman married James Thurman in 1947, and they raised 5 children. Robert Mosley was born at the county hospital in Wauwatosa. His maternal parents the Tuckers arrived in Milwaukee. They came originally from Louisiana, Missouri. They first migrated to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and in 1917, they settled in Milwaukee. The Tuckers were among the group of 25 Black families that lived in Bayview in the 1920s. Robert's paternal grandparents, James and Jeanette Mosley, arrived in Milwaukee in 1919, also from Cedar Rapids. They lived in tenement housing near St. Benedict the Moors. They originated from Atchison, Kansas. His parents met as students at Lincoln High School. Bobby grew up on 9th and Galena. He built his career working in finance and worked in banking at the First Wisconsin National Bank as a loan officer. And he also worked at North Milwaukee State Bank, the first Black bank in the city of Milwaukee. The pictures here, most of the pictures in this book have never been published before. They came from their personal collections. This little guy right here is Bobby with his 2 sisters, and this woman in the white is his mother, and the woman next to her is his aunt. Let's see if I can move that up. Yes. This picture here is a photograph from St. John's Lutheran School, where Bobby's mother actually attended school back in the day. And that's Bobby right there. The next person is William Bill Nolan. Bill was born in Milwaukee at St. Anthony's Hospital in 1938. And Bill was born in St. Anthony's because his father, who worked at Patrick Cudahy, had insurance from his job. So he was able to be born in Milwaukee at St. Anthony's Hospital. His family lived on 7th and Walnut and later moved just around the corner to 9th and Vine. Bill says that in his 80 years on earth, he's never lived north of North Avenue. He now lives in Brewers Hill, and he is one of my very dear neighbors. Bill's father was a butcher, came to Milwaukee when he got a job at Patrick Cudahy. Bill's mother was a homemaker for most of his childhood, although she did work outside of the home for a time. She was excellent at crocheting and would share her skills with her neighbors. She and one of her Jewish neighbors would sit at her kitchen table for hour after hour. She would teach her friend how to crochet, and her friend taught her how to speak Yiddish. Bill attended the Leighton School of the Arts. He is a fantastic artist, and some of his artwork is featured in the book. You can't see them very clearly on the PowerPoint, but his work is just amazing. Bill received training in dental work in the Army and found employment after he came out of the Army at the Veteran Affairs Dental Lab, where he stayed for 31 years. Bill met Annie, the woman he would marry and share his life with. They dated for over 10 years before they finally tied the knot, and they raised 4 daughters. And this painting right here, although you can't see it clearly, is Annie. The painting he's holding is of his grandson, Josh. Dr. Bronzeville, excuse me, Reuben. Reuben Harper was born in Wauwatosa in 1934. His family lived on 4th Street and Garfield Avenue. When he was 8 years old, he and his mother moved to 807 West Summer Street with his grandparents. Ruben's mother and maternal grandparents moved to Milwaukee from Little Rock, Arkansas. His father came to the city from Kansas City, and his parents met as students at Lincoln High School. Harpo, again, has a storied career in the Milwaukee area, not only employment-wise, but also community activism-wise. He was married to Mildred Harpo, who was a very active member, especially in the areas of education. Ruben served at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee School of Continuing Education for 31 years as a senior outreach specialist, and brought many grants into the program over the years. Joe DECOU. Mr. DECOU was born officially in Wauwatosa at Milwaukee County Hospital in 1939. But according to his mother, he was born on 11th and Walnut Street when she was on her way to the hospital. Assuming the voice of his mother, he says, "You wasn't born in no hospital. You came out of me when they was taking me down the steps on 11th and Walnut. You was raising all kinds of hell. You was hollering more than I was." And that comment really personifies Joe's personality. Joe's father and mother moved to Milwaukee from New Orleans when his father got a job at Plankington Packing House. Joe's family moved on 9th Street and Walnut, and he grew up in the middle of the Walnut Business District. Another thing about Joe, he was the first Black man to operate a parking structure across the street from the Pfister Hotel in downtown Milwaukee. And he operated parking structures in downtown for over 35 years. These pictures here, this is his, he right here on the little guy right there, that's Joe. This is his brother, Roy, on the other side of I don't know which is left or right. I'm looking at it. He's on my left, and the guy in the middle is a friend of theirs. Joe was also a member of a singing group called the Keynotes. They were very popular. They were able to open for a famous singing group at a popular theater here. And this is a picture of them. They were in the 9th grade, and Joe said that was really big time for young guys in the 9th grade. The next person is Raymond Washington. Raymond was born at the county hospital in 1937. At the time, his family lived on West Galena. 5 years later, they moved to 9th and Walnut, just next door to Joe DECOU and his family. Raymond's family set down roots in Milwaukee in 1923 when his great uncle, Joe White, came here from Greenwood, Mississippi, looking for work. 2 years later, Joe sent for his sister's family, including Raymond's mother, Maddie. Joe is the second generation of his family to grow up in the city, and they lived for many years on North 6th Street in a cold water flat. And here's a picture of Raymond and his wife, Beverly. And there's also a picture here of his children. And this guy right down here is Raymond. Sharon Adams was born, she's the youngest in the group. She was born on January 17th, 1947 at St. Anthony's Hospital in Milwaukee. Her parents, Julius and Hattie Foster, and their daughter, Joella, moved to Milwaukee from Memphis, Tennessee in 1945. Julius worked as a supervisor at the Milwaukee Railroad as a point man and stayed in the job until he retired. Sharon remembers that her father took her to every job he worked on. When he worked at the Milwaukee Railroad, she said, I'd go to the Milwaukee Railroad and watch my dad switch the train tracks. After being away from the city for 27 years, Sharon returned to remodel or restore her family's home, the home in which she grew up. In the process of searching for someone to help, Sharon met the love of her life, Larry Adams. After only 1 year, the two were married. Carrying on the spirit of Bronzeville, Sharon and Larry went on to become leaders in transforming their neighborhood. The couple, along with their neighbors, founded Walnut Way Conservation Corporation in 2000 and developed Adams Garden Parks in 2020. This is one of my favorite parts of the book. This, of course, is Sharon and Larry. But this picture here is Sharon when she was about 10 years old. And you see that black doll there? I don't know what her parents must have done to acquire a black doll in the 1940s, but they found her a Rita doll. And the picture right below that is Sharon in her 70s with her old friend Rita. So Rita must be in her 70s also, but she kept that doll. And when she told me she still had Rita, I rushed right over with a camera to get that picture. So those are, okay, so those are the folks who are featured in the book. And when I sat down with them, I didn't want to guide them. I wanted them to guide me. So they just started talking. These 4 guys right here, these are the ones that sit in Bill's kitchen. Bill, Raymond, Bobby, and Joe. So I just listened to what they were talking about, and that kind of brought the whole book together. One of the first things that they talked about was the community in which they lived. And I preface this part of the book with this comment here. While segregation meant that people in Bronzeville were confined to a particular area of the city, it did not mean the community was denied essential and basic needs. Black people created their own elaborate economic and social structure. They opened and operated many restaurants and eating establishments, barbershops, and beauty salons. Everything was available from dry cleaners and tailors to entertainment venues, social clubs, and sports teams. The I-43 highway cut across the heart of the community, and the shops and housing stock is long gone, but the landscape still lives in the memories of some of those who came of age in that space. And here's some of the quotes from the folks from the book. Bill says, I go through there now and I get a visual of what was there before. All the taverns that used to be on Juno, you know, as far as entertainment, eating and living. Yeah, you could see where there was a restaurant, Clara's Restaurant, which was a very popular place in those days, but there's not a sign showing it, but I can visualize where it was. It's actually on the picture, and he's referring to a very famous picture of Walnut Street. But nobody would know if you weren't raised in that time. You wouldn't know that this is the restaurant where all the Black entertainers came from. The entertainers that came from out of town had to come to eat dinner. At that time, we had our own hotel. You know, there used to be a big mansion on 4th and Galena, the old Slits Mansion. They made it into a hotel. If you looked at it today, it would be like one of those big mansions that you see on Lake Drive. They tore all that down. So that was the thing, that was the striking thing. Their memories were so clear. And if I have time, I'm going to tell you something about that clear memory at the end of the talk. They talked about living with other ethnicities. And I titled this chapter Living Across Racial and Ethnic Lines. And Bill told the story about his mother and Mrs. Seabar. The Seabars had a grocery store that was directly across the street from us. Mrs. Seabar was Jewish, and my mother taught her how to knit and crochet. She would come over to our house just about every day in the afternoon. In fact, that's how my mother learned to speak Yiddish. She and Mrs. Seabar would sit at her kitchen table for hours. She would teach her friend to crochet, and her friend taught her to speak Yiddish. So my mother used to go to the stores, and the people were Jewish, and she would talk Yiddish. My mother was a real jokester anyway, and she used to get off on that. Mamie remembers the neighborhood that way. She said, we had a nice neighborhood on 5th Street. It was mostly white people. We had a few colored people. We lived near a person, Lawyer Hampton and Dorsey, Leroy Simmons and Isaac Coggs. I did a lot of walking and signing up people to vote there. And those folks that she's referring to were lawyers and doctors. Isaac Coggs was a very well-known and among the first Black people to serve in the state legislature, among other things. And he really, his whole family is a tradition of public service in Milwaukee politics by the Coggs family. And also this comment from Ms. Thurman really sort of shows you the economic diversity in the neighborhood as well. So poor folks live with wealthier folks, and they all live together. The other sense I got is these folks got their strong work ethics from their parents. George, for example, talked about his mother. He said, she did day work, if you know what that is. You go and you clean up other people's houses. Generally, all day work people would meet up at some place on 3rd Street. Then they would be picked up and taken out to Shorewood, mostly Shorewood, upscale white folk. And they would be picked up when they got off work and brought back to the hood. That's how that worked. And they would call it day work. Joe, his mother also did day work. And he talked about how his parents' work ethic also impacted him. He said, when your mother has so many kids, you know you ain't gonna get a new bike. You know you ain't gonna get certain kinds of clothes. So you got a paper route. My mother could do nothing but put a roof over our head and provide some food. I got a job at a restaurant to keep money in my pocket. I used to sell rags. I used to sell paper, cardboard. We sold that to try to make it. A lot of people don't know what a hustle is. We used to cash in bottles. You could cash in Coca-Cola bottles at 2 cents and get money for them. So whatever they had to do to make money, that's what they did. The other place they all talked about, every one of them talked about LAPHAM Park, the LAPHAM Park Social Center, and the activity there that took place there. It was a real community gathering place. And the way Bobby put it, he said, at some point in time during the day, practically everybody was at LAPHAM Park. He said they met each other at LAPHAM Park. They didn't even know where each other lived. They never went to each other's houses. They met at LAPHAM Park. He said, we went to school, then we went home and maybe grabbed a snack, then headed up to LAPHAM Park. See, that was like the gathering place. It was a playground. They had everything there. At LAPHAM Park, you had two sides, the girls' side and the boys' side. Although you could go back and forth. The boys' side was most popular. Practically everybody was there. They played softball and football and everything you could think of. We had 2 baseball diamonds there. And at some point during the day, practically everybody was at LAPHAM Park. Met people through LAPHAM Park. You didn't know where they lived. We never asked people where they lived. And the thing is, it was open so long, from early morning until about 9 o'clock at night. A popular feature of Lapham Park was the Lapham Park swimming pool. It was about 1941. The swimming pool was built as a WPA program, and it was built in response to the community pressure for more recreational spaces. And the swimming pool, which was apparently a block long, was very popular, and there would be annual events, swimming events, diving competitions at Lapham Park Pool. And Bobby says the swimming pool was open in the summertime from about June to September. A lot of people don't realize how big that pool was. The pool was about a block long, brown on the north, and it went all the way down the reservoir. From 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. it was free. I would go home because I was only a block and a half from the pool. I would eat lunch, and then at 10 p.m., at 1 p.m., it would open up again from 10 until about 4. And if it was real hot, it reopened at 9. Joe was very impressed by some of the swimmers, and one of the most popular swimmers during that time was Sims, a swimmer by the name of, let me just take a quick look in my book so I can get it right. Sylvester Sims. And actually, Sylvester Sims is even known in popular today. He was not only a fantastic swimmer and athlete, he was also a fantastic artist. But Joe says it was almost like Olympic diving. Ever so often before the swim time was over, the divers would congregate around the diving board. Everybody knew and would say, they're getting together over there. They'd be trying to outdo each other. One guy would do a flip, the next guy would do a triple flip. And it was a very, very popular scene. This picture here, it's not in my book. I could not find one big enough to be reproduced. But this is, when I showed this picture to Joe, he said, that looks like him right there. This picture on top is the last thing that is left of the Lapham Park swimming pool. This used to be the place where the administrative offices and those kind of things were. And they talked about their schools. Just like the housing was limited, so were the schools. And most of the people in the book and most of the kids in the Bronzeville area went to only a certain number of schools. St. Benedict the Moor was also important in the life of Bronzeville. It was a Catholic school, and there's a large group of Black Catholics in the city of Milwaukee, even today. And St. Benedict's was opened in 1912, and it was open primarily to service the African-American community. Mamie talked about a typical day at school. She said before school, you had to go to church for about a half an hour, 45 minutes. We would have breakfast, a peanut butter sandwich and a glass of grapefruit juice. For lunch, we would go to my grandmother's house for a hot lunch. Then we'd go back to school. I worked with a man who taught me how to set type and things like that. We never learned anything about Black history. And this picture is a picture of St. Benedict the Moor. Mentoring children was also something that the folks talked about. Bobby told a very interesting story about a coloring book. He said, I had this old coloring book, and a kid, his name was Bobby Hunter. He wanted that coloring book. He said, I'll give you $20 for it. Next day, he came to school with $20 and bought the coloring book. I told all the kids to follow me to the store because I was going to buy everybody penny candy. Now, back in those days, $20 was a lot of money. You could feed a family for a long time with that kind of money. The storekeeper took the money and gave it to my teacher. My teacher contacted the kids' parents and found out he took the money out of his mother's purse. They got their money back, and he gave me back my coloring book. And what's interesting about this story is how interconnected the family, the school, along with the teachers, the person in the store, how connected they were and how they were all paying attention and watching out for the children. I don't know what kind of trouble the other kid got in, but Bobby got his coloring book back. I know I'm running out of time, so this will be the last quote from the book that I give, but it's a very interesting one. Urban League played a very central role in the lives of especially new people coming to Milwaukee and landing in the Bronzeville area. They helped not only with housing, but jobs and so on and so forth. They also had a very extensive youth program. One of the things they had was a boxing program for young people. Bill tells a story about Baby Joe Gans, who worked at the Urban League in the boxing program. Bill says his name was Charles Singleton. He lived right next door to me. We, Bill and this other young boy, got into a fight, and I don't even remember what the fight was about, but we was just slugging it out, and he's doing his hands like this as he's talking, fist to fist. We must have been about 7, 8, 9 years old, and just slugging. Baby Joe Gans comes across the street. Golden Gloves was just under the Urban League. They had a gym down there. Baby Joe Gans, he grabs me by the back of the collar, pulls us apart, grabs the other boy. He says, y'all want to fight, huh? He drug us across the street. My mom said she was watching the whole thing. He took us down in the gym, put these big old 16-ounce boxing gloves on us and put us in the ring. He said, okay, go to it. And Bill demonstrates. They go whoosh, whoosh. And the gloves were so heavy we could hardly lift them. We fought until we almost fell out. And Bill says, mean. That's all it was, just mean. And I said to Bill, that wasn't being mean. That was Baby Joe Gans, Charles Singleton, showing young people how to work out differences. And it's, in a sense, a very loving and mentoring way to be with kids. I end the book talking about leaving Bronzeville. In the overall scheme of things, Bronzeville survived for a relatively short period of time, just 40 years. The place that served as a home for so many people was bulldozed in the name of progress. Its final demise was brought on by two events: urban renewal designed to eliminate city blight, and the construction of the Market Interchange and the Interstate Highway I-43, creating a thoroughfare from the city to the suburbs. Over 8,000 houses and local stores in the heart of Milwaukee's Black community were cleared away as a result of these events. And that process ended probably about mid-60s. So yet the Black community still existed, and it still struggled, yes, but survived and thrived. And new neighborhoods came out of the old Bronzeville, including Hillside, Halyard Park, Lindsay Heights, and the largest area where Black folks live today is in Harambe. And so I talk a little bit about those neighborhoods to conclude the book.
All right. Good slide to leave it off on. Oh, do you want to leave it up just so we can look at the neighborhoods?
Oh, okay. Let me put it back up. Oh, right here. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say too that the new Taste of Lindsay Heights just opened. And it's just a good example of, I know that people are really trying to revitalize and bring back old businesses, bring in new businesses to the old Bronzeville area. And it's good to see that everyone had persevered and is still trying to keep going there.
Yes, most definitely.
It's always hard to hear about history of in Milwaukee highways bulldozing through people's neighborhoods, people's homes. And I know a lot of the people you interviewed, well, everyone you interviewed in the book is still in Milwaukee. So even after those events to happen, to say this is my home, I'm going to stay here.
Right.
And their families had stayed here. Did you find that the people you interviewed, did they also have like children, extended family who live in Milwaukee as well?
Yes. Many of them did. Many of them do. Bill, his daughters, some have moved away, but his daughters, he and Annie had 4 daughters, and 2 of them are here, and they have grandkids, and they're very active in their lives. His grandson Josh is off to college now, so yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So did anybody have any questions?
Yes, we will have the Q&As open as well as the chat. If anyone wants to add any questions there, we'll just keep an eye on it.
Okay.
As it takes a minute. And if anyone is wondering like where you can buy the book, I put a link in the chat as well. People can check out. And I wanted to ask, oh, sorry.
No, just to add, on November 18th, at 6 o'clock at Boswell Books, I'm going to be giving a talk there, and I'm going to be joined by one of the folks who's featured in the book, Sharon Adams.
Oh, great. I'll write that down too. I think Boswell must have that event on their website too. We can send that to everyone. That's great. As I wait for other questions too, I wanted to ask you, in addition to interviewing residents, what other types of research did you do?
I did did research on the history of Blacks in Wisconsin, the history of Blacks in Milwaukee, because I wanted to include that kind of as context for, the stories. So, I did that kind of research. The COVID epidemic really stopped a lot of things, because, I couldn't get to the library, so I had to depend on the internet. And I wanted to interview at least 20 people, but I only got 8. So, but I think these 8 represent, what I did not expect. One of the things that I didn't realize is how important this history was to the folks who lived it. Their excitement about this book is just unbelievable. I just didn't imagine. I didn't imagine how important it was. And then when I realized that the last book about Milwaukee Bronzeville had been published in 2006, Sharon puts it best. She says, people were hungry for this.
Yeah.
And but now people are mad at me because they said, how come you didn't put me in the book?
Oh, yeah, you're right about a volume 2. Just keep telling them, oh, next time.
Right.
And yeah, you're right. With COVID, it's like, well, you were so limited to begin with of how you could do it. And you're right that the 8 people you did interview, they seem to all have just a wealth of memories. Right. And of extreme like appreciativeness to like share the memories too.
Right. And I got Miss Thurman, who was born in the 1920s, and and Sharon Adams, who was born in the 1940s. Wow. So Miss Thurman saw the beginning of Bronzeville, and Sharon saw the end of it.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Because one of the things she talked about was when she and her family moved on 17th Street, tree-lined streets, and her parents were very proud. Instead of seeding the front yard, they put sod down. And just in a short period of time, when they started building the freeway, they tore all that down.
Wow.
So, good memories, but also pain.
Yeah.
In this story.
Definitely.
Yeah. But the folks didn't want to, and I didn't necessarily want to focus on the pain. I wanted to
Mhm.
focus on the joy,
Yeah,
you know?
I think that definitely came through with the quotes and the stories you shared. I'm sure other people watching too, like you find yourself laughing and smiling at some of these quotes. And I think anyone who reads the book too, if you had grandparents or parents who lived in Milwaukee,
Mhm.
just ask, oh, do you remember this too? Like, I think that a lot of these things are like very shared experiences.
Right. And I found a lot of that too. My mother lives in a senior living complex, and I took the book out there, and folks were pointing, oh, I went to Lloyd Street School, and
Uh-huh.
those kind of
Aw.
things. So it reaches beyond the folks in this book.
Yeah.
It's the history of a generation,
Hmm.
or maybe, yeah, generation of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So no
Okay.
questions.
No questions. It happens every once in a while.
Okay.
Yeah, and I like to say it's because your presentation is just very thorough. People are like, oh, that answered anything that I needed to know. And I'll definitely send a follow-up email to everyone, and I can forward you if anyone thinks of any questions after the fact.
That would be fine. That
I'll
would
get
be
them in
fine.
contact.
That would be fine.
Awesome.
And please get the book.
Yes, come get the book, read the book. And I'm sure people might want to reach out to you after they read it too, if they want to learn anything else. We just had a comment. Just because we didn't have questions doesn't mean this wasn't absolutely delightful. Says Sean.
Thank you.
That was a really, really great presentation. And we really appreciate you coming on, I wouldn't say coming in, but coming on to Zoom, where we could reach everyone in their homes. And
Yes.
all enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good rest of your night.
All right, you too.
Okay, bye.